Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Genesis Client Services webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic surrounding coping skills, and then we'll also be practicing a coping skill together. We're really glad that you are tuned in to watch and that you are watching on YouTube if this is later. So just a few reminders. This presentation is for educational purposes. Please consider your own situation and safety concerns before putting into practice any of the ideas that we talk about today. Some safety things to consider. Please be sure to watch this in a safe place where only safe people can hear it. And you might also consider wearing headphones to ensure that nobody else can hear what you are watching. Also, remember to clear your browser history after watching this video if someone monitors your phone or computer. And remember, if you need to leave the live Zoom webinar quickly, you will have to click a couple of things, and you'll have to click leave the meeting and close the Zoom page. So that's just something to consider if you do have to leave quickly. Okay, confidentiality. Just like we always talk about here at Genesis, your confidentiality as a client is really important to us. And so we want to make sure that still on these webinars, we are maintaining confidentiality. So please do not use the chat feature on Zoom. If you do use the chat feature, your name and comment will be seen by anyone watching the live video and also the video recording on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, any comments that you leave on the YouTube video recording will also be seen by anyone else who watches the video. If you do have any questions and wanted to get in touch with Belinda and I during this webinar today, we ask that you please contact us directly. So we have our contact information here, and we will also leave it at the end of the webinar. We do not monitor or respond to any comments or questions left on the YouTube video recordings. So please contact us directly if you do need any help. So this webinar is not meant to be a replacement for crisis support. If you are in crisis or need help with emergency safety planning, or if you are looking for emergency shelter due to domestic violence, please call our 24-hour hotline at 214-946-4357. If you would like to sign up for counseling at Genesis or want to talk to a counselor about your situation, you can also call our main outreach number at 214-389-7700. Okay. Whoops, skipped a couple. Okay, so here are some hotline numbers. Again, here's the Genesis Women's Shelter and Support Hotline. There's also the National Domestic Violence Hotline number as well, and that is 800-799-7233. There's also a chat feature on the National Domestic Violence Hotline website. So if it's safer for you to use a chat feature online to talk with someone, you can utilize that at thehotline.org. And there's also the National Suicide Hotline number here for your reference. That is 800-273-8255. And before we get started, I want to introduce my co-host, Belinda. If you don't mind saying your name, Belinda.
Good morning. I'm Belinda Cardwell. I'm also a counselor here at Genesis.
Great, and I don't think I said my name either. I'm Victoria O'Connor. I'm one of the counselors here at Genesis. So like I said before, we are going to be talking about a discussion on coping skills today. In particular, as you can see, we will be discussing unhelpful thinking patterns. And we're also going to close this discussion today practicing a coping skill. So Belinda will lead us through a guided relaxation exercise later on. So before we get started talking about these unhelpful thinking patterns, I wanted to point out that a couple weeks ago, we talked about different categories of coping skills. And one of those categories is thought challenge. So thought challenging as a coping skill is just like it sounds, being able to challenge potentially negative thoughts or unhelpful thoughts that you might be having. And so to be able to do that, one thing that we want to teach you is to know what are some unhelpful thinking patterns that you might be using in your thoughts. And before I start going over these, each example, I also want to highlight that everybody uses these unhelpful thinking patterns. So these are kind of like shortcuts that our brain does in order for us to be able to take things in quicker, to assess situations faster. It's actually a survival tool that our brains use. So these different shortcuts, they might be thoughts that maybe aren't completely accurate, but our brain uses them and develops them in order to keep us safe and to keep us surviving. So everybody uses these at some points in their life. I'll use some examples from my own, life as well. And, we all have these unhelpful thinking patterns. So let's go over these in depth, each one. Okay. All right, so this first one is all or nothing thinking. So that means oversimplifying things as either good versus bad or right versus wrong. So it's basically kind of like this black and white thinking. You're just completely leaving out any sort of gray area. So I included graphics throughout this presentation to kind of help with being able to, visualize. So this is a visual here where you can see it's either all black, it's all white, there's no gray in the thinking. So some examples of this type of thinking pattern would be, if I'm not perfect, then I have failed, right? So really it's all failure or it's all perfect, there's nothing in between. Another example would be either I do it right or not at all. So just kind of that, really extreme right versus wrong, and there's nothing in between. Another example of this all or nothing thinking could be if you were, in an argument with a friend and really, thinking like someone is either right and someone is wrong. And so there's just that, it's just right and wrong. There's not a middle ground. There's not that gray area where maybe both people are right and wrong. So that's another example of this all or nothing thinking. Okay, let's see. Overgeneralizing. So overgeneralizing means seeing a pattern based on a single incident. So another way to think about this is kind of that one thing or one time equals all times or all situations. So one equals all. And this is often a negative event is seen as a never-ending pattern. So I have this little dog here that kind of tells us another example of overgeneralizing. So this dog is thinking, all cats have 4 legs and a tail. I have 4 legs and a tail, therefore I am a cat. So you can see how that is an example of overgeneralizing. So, any animal that has 4 legs is a cat, therefore any animal with 4 legs is a cat. But we know that's not necessarily true. And that same kind of principle, we apply that to different aspects of our lives and our thinking patterns. So an example that sometimes we hear here at Genesis is all relationships are unhealthy. I had this one unhealthy relationship, and so then I have this belief that all relationships are unhealthy. And again, this is, like I was saying, a survival tool that our brain uses, and that's a way that our brain is protecting ourselves. We might have this thought then to keep us safer in the future and to keep us from getting into a future relationship that could be unhealthy. So then we adopt this overgeneralizing thought that all relationships are unhealthy. Another example of this would be nothing good ever happens to me. Another example could be, me as a counselor, if I tell myself, I had one bad session, so I will never be a good counselor. So using that one bad time to then overgeneralize and say, I'll never be a good counselor. Okay, jumping to conclusions. So this is another really commonly used unhelpful thinking pattern. And there's 2 different types of jumping to conclusions. So this could be either fortune telling or mind reading. Fortune telling is just like it sounds, believing you can predict the future. Not necessarily believing that you can predict the future, but it's just that thought, right, that you are predicting what's going to happen in the future. So some examples of this would be, I'm going to fail this test. Or, maybe your boss asked to have a meeting with you. And so your thought is, I'm going to get fired. And so that's like, you know, your thoughts are trying to predict what's going to happen in the future. That's an example of fortune telling. Mind reading, again, just like it sounds, is assuming that people are thinking negatively or negatively of you when there is no evidence for this. So, you know, those thoughts that you think you can know what is in other people's minds, or that you can read other people's minds. So for example, maybe a coworker doesn't say hi to you as they pass by, and your thought is, they must not like me. Another example of this would be, you know, maybe you're walking down the street and you pass a group of people and they're laughing. Maybe your thought is, they must think I'm stupid. And so that would be another example of mind reading. Okay, emotional reasoning. So emotional reasoning is when you're using emotions as proof. So this basically is saying that, assuming that because we feel a certain way, it must be true. An example of this would be, I feel afraid or I feel fear, so I must be in danger. And again, this is a way that our brain is giving us a shortcut, a way to help us survive. So if you're feeling afraid, that's going to help you in the future, you know, to survive and to help you make sure that you're going to be protected and keep yourself safe. But if the situation isn't necessarily a true threat or true danger, that thought can actually keep you stuck and can keep you, you know, stuck in a situation, or might not be helpful. Another example of this would be, I feel guilty, so I must have done something wrong. Or maybe it's, you know, something fragile broke around you and it was an accident, and you feel bad, you feel sad, of course. So then you tell yourself, it must be my fault. It was my fault that this thing broke. So that is emotional reasoning, using your emotions as proof of something. Okay. This next thinking pattern is kind of two-sided. So magnification and minimization. So they're kind of opposites. Magnification is also called catastrophizing, and this means exaggerating or blowing things out of proportion. So I have this graphic here of this, you know, this man being chased by these giant snowballs, right? They're getting bigger and bigger. It's kind of that idea of like snowballing, your thoughts are snowballing out of control. So an example of this would be, if I don't do well in this presentation at work, I will get fired and I will be a total failure in life. So, right, it's, you know, one thought after another that becomes really exaggerated and really catastrophized. The opposite side of that would be minimization. So this is when you're shrinking the importance of something inappropriately to make it seem less important. So maybe this could be after, you know, someone compliments you and your, you know, automatic thought is, oh, it's nothing, or they're just being polite. And so not really accepting that compliment, right? Just kind of shrinking it. It's not really that important to you. I think a lot of people do that minimization. Another example could be, you know, if there was a danger and then you just say, it's not that big of a deal. I'm fine. It's going to be okay. Okay, this next pattern is should statements. So these are different thoughts that we use with critical words like should, must, or ought to. So again, this is going to be like putting unrealistic expectations on yourself so that you could potentially protect yourself in the future, or potentially be better off going forward in the future. So this is, again, something that your brain is doing in order to help keep you safe. So maybe an example of this is, I should have known better. This is another really common statement that we hear at Genesis. If you were, you know, driving and a car cut you off, maybe you would have had no idea that that was going to happen, but you tell yourself, I should have known better. I should have seen the car. So that way in the future, you try to, you know, protect yourself anytime you're driving, to be able to protect yourself from a future car accident. Another example of this would be, like I said, those unrealistic expectations on yourself. So I must be the perfect mother. That would be another example. And these should statements can carry a lot of weight. They can really, over time, really affect your self-esteem and affect your sense of self. And they can really add up. The more that you're telling yourself, I should be this way, or I must do this thing, it can really add up and take a real big toll on your self-esteem. Okay. And then finally, we have mental filter and disqualifying the positive. So these are a little bit similar, so I put them together here. Mental filter is this, thought pattern where you're only paying attention to certain types of evidence. And often this is noticing our failures or noticing the negatives and not seeing the successes or the positives. So in this little graphic, if you're receiving feedback or comments at work, let's say, and you receive 4 different positive feedback statements and one maybe, a little bit more critical or one that's more negative, and you're really only paying attention to that negative. Those other positives don't matter. You're honing in and focusing on that negative thought. Another example of this would be on social media. Maybe it's that idea, well, I only got 10 comments on this post, so it's a terrible photo and I'm deleting it. So really not paying attention to the comments. Maybe they were all positive comments. Those were 10 good comments, really compliments. And because it was only 10, then deciding that's not a good photo, I'm going to delete it. This also kind of goes in line with disqualifying the positive. So that means discounting the good things that have happened or that you have done. So let's say you have success or you do something really well at work, but kind of telling yourself, well, that doesn't count. That was just beginner's luck, or that was just a one-time thing. It doesn't really count. So those are some unhelpful thinking patterns. Like I said, everybody uses these thinking patterns, and it really, we're teaching these to be able to help you figure out what are, maybe your top 2 or 3 unhelpful thinking patterns that you use. For example, maybe I most of the time use jumping to conclusions, and I'm always, trying to think about, oh, this is going to happen. I'm kind of preparing myself. And you'll also see as we were going through these examples that different thoughts, there might be some overlap in what kind of unhelpful thinking pattern it is. So it could be that a negative thought fits into a couple of these different categories. There can be some overlap with some of these different patterns. It's not necessarily important to correctly categorize a thought as, jumping to conclusions or overgeneralizing. It's not necessarily important to know what it is. It's more important about being aware that you're having this unhelpful thinking pattern and starting to challenge that. And journaling can be one way that you can help to challenge negative thoughts. So we'll talk about that in a second. Belinda, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I just kind of wanted to emphasize what you've already said, that we all have these thinking patterns. I know that I'm a champion catastrophizer, but having realized that over the course of a couple of weeks of just jotting down my thinking patterns, which I think everybody needs to do, is just kind of be aware of them first. And as Victoria said, it's not really important what they are, it's just that it's the pattern, and it keeps you from maybe looking at something in a more helpful way. So just be aware of your patterns, whether you can do it through journaling or just like when you start to feel a little stressed or a little emotionally heightened, stop and go, okay, is this a thinking pattern? I need to back off for a minute and just think about what I'm thinking. So these are very helpful. We all do them. We do them to different extremes depending on what's going on. So just being aware of them is really the first step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one way to be aware of these different patterns in your life is to just notice what's going on with what you're telling yourself and maybe start to write it down and journal about it. So I've included some journal prompts here that can help to challenge some of these negative thoughts. So for example, if my thought, going into this presentation today, let's say my thought was, if I don't do well on this presentation, then I'm going to get fired and I'm going to be a total failure in life. So something I could do is just write that thought down. And it might not sound that clear, realistically, it might not sound that nice and packaged up like that, but just writing down what you're telling yourself, and then maybe start to ask yourself these questions. Is this thought 100% accurate? In this example, actually, that's not 100% accurate. My boss has never said, if you don't do well on this webinar presentation, then that means that you're going to get fired. So I can, remind myself, this actually isn't 100% accurate. Maybe another way to ask this is, what's the evidence for and what's the evidence against this thought? So maybe as I'm journaling, I write down, this feels true. The evidence for this thought is that it feels true. It feels like if I do bad, I'm going to be a failure. But maybe the evidence against is that nowhere in our handbook of policies does it say if you do poorly on a webinar, is that grounds for firing? And also, maybe another way to think about this is, what is a failure? I'm telling myself I'm going to be a failure, but what does that even mean? And so maybe that's some evidence against as well. Is there another way to look at this situation? Maybe in this particular case, if I don't do well on this presentation, I will be disappointed. That would be true. And maybe another way to look at it is that I could get feedback from colleagues and I can get some help from my boss or something to help me improve, to help me to do better the next time. Is this thought helpful? If I'm telling myself, if I don't do well, then I'm going to get fired, I'm going to be a failure, that's not really helpful. That's going to keep me stuck in a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety. That's going to make me probably more nervous for my presentation. And so that thought isn't necessarily helpful. It's not really helping me move forward. Do I want to have this thought? I don't really want to tell myself that I'm going to be a failure. So maybe I don't really want to have this thought. And what would you say to a friend or a loved one who said this thought? So if I had a friend at work who was saying, if I don't do well on this presentation, then I'm going to get fired, I'm going to be a failure, I would remind them, you can only do the best that you can, and your best is probably going to be okay. You're going to do fine. You've prepared for this webinar. You've prepared for this presentation. You've worked really hard. So I would remind them those messages. And chances are when we tell when we tell a friend or a loved one something, we're a lot kinder than when we tell ourselves things. And so being able to challenge yourself and tell yourself those things, that yes, you worked hard. It's going to be okay. You've prepared. Those are positive messages that then you can start to tell yourself. So these are helpful prompts that you can use to help challenge negative thoughts in your life. Again, you can use this with journaling. Maybe you just start to think about these different thoughts as you're going throughout your day. And just asking yourself, is this really true? Is this really helpful? Is it realistic? And chances are we're telling ourselves these things that are really unhelpful and really, really extreme thoughts. Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to Belinda now.
Yes, thank you, Victoria. So when we're getting stressed out and our thoughts are kind of racing and getting the better of us, it's always good to kind of do a coping skill, such as a meditation or visualization. And so we talked about coping skills pretty much since the beginning of these webinars. And one category is meditation or mindfulness. So I'm going to lead us today in a meditation that's from Mindfulness Exercises, which is the website. And the importance of being mindful is not being judgmental, not judging yourself, but just being. So I'm going to go through this meditation. It takes about 5 minutes. I've used it myself and it was very helpful. So I hope everybody can enjoy this one. And again, if you don't particularly connect with this one, because we're going to be visualizing stress as a storm, there are tons of meditation, impressive and helpful. So we're going to go ahead and get to our picture to kind of get us in the mood. And also, since it's a guided meditation, there'll be some pauses, so just hang in there and we'll get through this. Again, it takes about 5 minutes. Okay, we'll start with a deep breath in and out. So when we are presented with situations in our life that are very high stress, it seems impossible to get past the stressful feelings to see clearly or to think clearly. One way to tackle high stress situations is through full and conscious breathing. When we are not present in our bodies, our thoughts can carry us away, making stressful situations even more so. Luckily, when we have awareness to focus on our breath and body, we can bring ourselves back into the present moment, bringing us some clarity. So let's honor our breath and how it brings us in the present moment by taking 5 significant and purposeful breaths. Number 1, fully inhale, expanding your belly and chest as much as you can, holding it for a moment. Exhale, feeling a wave of relaxation sweep over you. Number 2, inhale, filling your entire breathing system with fresh oxygen. Hold it. And exhale, the wave of relaxation gently sweeping over you. Third breath, inhale, so that you're brimming with air, holding it, soaking it in the oxygen. And exhale. Your body relaxes in different areas without any effort. Number 4, fully inhale, filling these breaths, purifying your entire body. Exhale, just notice how you are feeling. And the 5th breath from the oxygen. And exhale, allowing relaxation to sweep over you. Take note of how you feel at this very moment. You now have an abundance of oxygen. Breathing deeply and fully is an expression of self-compassion. Let the flow of your breath become natural and notice how abundance feels. Now, visualize yourself standing in a big field and no one else is around. Everything is calm and peaceful. You are surrounded by nature. Sit down in this meadow and look around, noticing the beauty all around you. You are fully relaxed. In the distance, you see dark clouds closing in as the sky grows a little darker. You see that a small storm is forming, and you may feel some raindrops falling down. Imagine that this storm is your stress. It could be mild stress with just some rain and a little wind, or it could be very high stress with extremely strong winds and a very heavy rain pouring down. In this visual, we are going to face a very strong and powerful storm to make ourselves stronger within. As you feel the storm getting even stronger and the wind is blowing harder and harder, you sit there in the meadow, completely unfazed by it. The storm cannot hurt you here. You have a chance to react to the storm with fear or with love and compassion, knowing that this storm is harmless in this visualization you are creating. Stress is a reaction to fear and worry, and even feeling overwhelmed. We have to learn the proper reaction to these emotions. Sometimes you can't help it, and stress will take over in a matter of seconds, and we must handle it or it will handle us. Just like sitting through the storm in the field, stress cannot harm you if you know that it will simply pass you by. Really embrace this stress and fully let it exist without fighting it, without judging it. This storm of stress in front of you is very dark. The clouds are getting thicker. The rain is coming down with fury. You decide to get up from where you are and slowly start walking towards it without fear, without worry, just confidence that you are safe and in control. You get closer and closer as the storm draws near and the wind blows with tremendous speed. The winds and the rains have no effect on you. It is easy for you to step forward. As you look forward, you see the eye of the storm. And around that eye, the winds and the rains are extremely powerful and strong. Yet you have no worry as you step inside of the eye. You are standing now inside the center, and everything is calm and peaceful here. You look around from within the eye of the storm and can see all the chaos around you. But inside here, it is calm and cozy. This is your space, your safe place. And so when the stress has finally taken over you, you have a choice to let it blow over without a fight, just sitting right in the middle of it, realizing that it cannot hurt you here. Witness your body is the center, and any stress is just a storm surrounding you. You are in control. It can always come back to your safe space. And now the storm is losing its power. It's dying down. The rain is easing up, and it's now only drizzling. You see the clouds drifting away as the sky gets brighter. The sunlight peeks through the clouds as they pass by, then eventually burst out with great intensity, shining a beautiful light all around you. You see the birds and hear them singing. You see butterflies and hear bees buzzing around the flowers. Everything is beautiful. This moment represents you being in a beautiful state of mind where stress has passed you by. Now we are going to take 3 deep breaths in, slowly bringing ourselves back to the present moment. First breath, a nice full breath of fresh energy. Second breath, breathing, taking in all that you have learned today. And the third breath, taking in another helpful breath, allowing the memory of your strength through the storm to be present in your mind right now. And gradually come back to the present moment. So thank you for joining us today. We enjoyed presenting to you, and we hope you learned something new. And again, our information is listed on the slide. So contact us directly with any questions or comments about what was presented today or any services Genesis can offer you.
Yes, thank you so much for leading that, Belinda. I know my body is feeling more calm and relaxed now after that great guided visualization. So thank you for that. We hope that you guys found this information helpful, and feel free to play back that part of the visualization if that was nice. You can even go back and watch this on YouTube. Even just play, that clip or that part of this video as a way to help you relax or calm in the face of that stress. So thank you so much for watching today. Again, our contact information is here, and please let us know if you have any questions.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Yes.